It's a very big pleasure to be here. And I would like to say before I start that this work has been done with my colleagues, Simone Dinsburg, who's sitting here, who's a neurobiologist, and Zohar Bronfman, a wonderful student who's done two PhDs, one in cognitive science and one in philosophy. And so it's the three of us. So when I say we, this is what I mean. It's not a broad. Okay. So I'm going to talk about trying to connect the evolution of sentience, minimal consciousness, with the evolution of learning. And I would try to present an approach about how we can go about answering a very, very difficult question, such as the question of how did something like consciousness evolve in the first place. So first of all, I'm going to talk about minimal consciousness. I'm going to do something that Björn probably doesn't like because I'm using an adjective. And what I mean by minimal consciousness here is I'm not talking about reflective consciousness of humans. I'm talking about the most basic non-reflective subjective feeling that includes extroceptive, visual, olfactory, interoceptive, pain, hunger, thirst, and proprioceptive, positioned experiences. So I'm talking about nominal consciousness at its simplest. If such a thing exists, there are people who think that it doesn't exist at its simplest, that only linguistically endowed individuals have this kind of consciousness. We deeply disagree with this, but I just want to put it on the table. Now, what do we suggest in this lecture? We suggest that what we want to try and do in this lecture is not to define consciousness, and not, although I hope that by the end of the lecture it will be clearer what we actually mean when we say that, but to find the evolutionary marker for minimal consciousness and to identify the selective context in which something like consciousness or sentience evolved. So, I want just to say that evolutionary marker is not exactly the same as a neural correlate of consciousness or a causal correlate of consciousness. It's something that evolutionarily is a causal explanatory correlate. As I will make clear, it doesn't have to be so in current organisms, in all current organisms at all stages of development. Okay, so how do we go about it? Now, the kind of approach that we are adopting is an approach, as a particular evolutionary approach, which is called the evolutionary transition approach. And it's an approach that looks at the origin of a particular trait. This is its ambition, the very first origins of a particular trait. And the reason that this kind of transition approach is useful is that it points to the type of organisms that appeared immediately after the transition, and this organism would be in some sense, the simplest of its kind, and thus it will enable us to recognize the most fundamental organizational principles that constitute the trait of interest, which is experiencing in this case. That's one reason. The other thing is that this kind of framework, the general framework of evolutionary transitions, can point to useful analogies and explanatory strategies, and we use those, as you will see in this lecture. So we ask ourselves the question. It's a very, very difficult thing to define consciousness and to know what we're talking about and when this transition has happened. Right? What kind of comparable problem was there in the history of biology? And we said a comparable problem was the problem of life. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, people found it very, very, very difficult to define what life is. People there were a lot of ideas on offer, and an evolutionary approach was extremely useful in clarifying the nature of the kind of organization, dynamic organization that we call living organization, and helped us to dissolve in some way the hard problem of what life is. Now, the problem of consciousness is similar in our eyes in that there are three big kind of transitions, as we see, in the evolution of life in this world. The first one is the transition to a living system. The second one is the transition to a minimally conscious system, to creatures that not only process information but actually feel things. And the third one is that of rational creatures, or creatures with our kind of symbolic ability. This is taken from Aristotle. This kind of distinctions are taken from Aristotle. So we thought what Aristotle pointed out and highlighted was that these are goal-directed systems. They are not only goal-directed, they are also goal-directing, which is very, very important for the discussion. So we said, well, let's look at a good approach to the evolution of life. Let's see if we can learn something from it and apply it to the evolution of consciousness. So that's what we did. And when we were trying to do that, we looked at all kinds of ideas and all kinds of approaches, and we chose the approach of somebody who's not very well known. He passed away, a theoretical chemist and biologist called Eva Jablonka, who lived in Hungary. And he gave a framework for investigating minimal life systems. Minimal life system very, very early on, already in the 1960s, he suggested something very, very similar, but more concrete than the autopoietic kind of ideas of naturality forever. Okay, so what did he say? What did he do? So Jablonka's approach was like this. First of all, I list the necessary and sufficient characteristics and conditions for a living organism. I've taken from the literature, from what people did, from everywhere. I'll compile it with something that can be said to be more or less a consensus list. Second, I will construct on the basis of this list a toy model that spells out the dynamic organizations that can instantiate these properties. Third, I will suggest something, a capacity of this system, that marks that when you find it in a system, you will say this system is alive, right? In a biological system, in a biological chemical system, we're not talking about robots. We're talking about messy biology. And then you can point to evolutionary scenarios, you can reframe philosophical questions, and so on and so forth. Now, we're not going in this precise order, but we're going to follow this kind of orientation. So, Jablonka had a list of criteria, I will not go into them. Then he pointed to 8 criteria, 5 of which, the first 5 are necessary and sufficient, in fact, and the other 6 are necessary for sustainable life. You can have life that sort of pops up and disappears. It's very, very unstable, very fragile. But in order to have something that he called sustainable life, you need to have, in addition to inherent unity, metabolism, inherent stability, some inherent stability, information carrying subsystem program control, also growth and multiplication. And the red thing is a hereditary system enabling open-ended evolution, and something called mortality, which we are very aware of. But now, this is in red because he said that when you find a system that has a hereditary system enabling open-ended evolution, even if this is the only thing that you find in just when we're visiting another world, this will tell you, well, probably there is a living system there. This is a marker of a living system. That's what Jablonka suggested. And Smith and Sutton went on to sharpen and develop these ideas. Sutton, it's part of his research project today too. One of his many research projects. Now, the kind of thing that Jablonka suggested was that the implementation of this system is something that we call autopoietic system. It's not his term. He used a particular form of an autopoietic system, a self-maintaining and self-producing system that is distinguishable from the environment. This is a definition of Maturana and Varela. This is a system that is necessary, that when you find this open-ended hereditary system, you can reverse engineer from that into quite a complex system. And the kind of system that he suggested was and the kind of system that he suggested was something that he called a chemotor. This is the chemotor. It has a membrane. It has 3 autocatalytic systems that are coupled: a membrane system, which is self-assembling, an autocatalytic kind of member of metabolism here, and some kind of information on molecules that give information about the whole system. And it's a very, very simple information. The information says when this, the information here in this particular model is regulating when the chematon will sort of grow. And eventually, because of spherical kind of disruptions, will also divide. But I don't want to go into the model. What I'm trying to say is that this model is his, he took the criteria that he listed, and he built the simplest model that you could imagine on the basis of this. One of the capacities he had in this model was this kind of thing that we call the transition marker. It's a particular capacity of the system, which in his case was open-ended heredity. Now, what is the unlimited or unlimited heredity, as Ursa, Murray, and Maynard-Smith call it? What is unlimited heredity? It is a system which has a huge number of hereditary variations that are much, much, much greater than the number of environments that the system is likely to encounter ever. Limited heredity is, let's say, we can have a system like a chematon, which has only 5 different states. Okay, it will cycle among these 5 different states. When it meets an environment that doesn't fit any of these states, hello and goodbye. It goes extinct. Now, if you take the unlimited heredity system and you try to understand how this kind of system can be realized, what is necessary for it to be in place in the at all, you come to a very interesting conclusion that you need something very similar to a cell. Again, we're talking about biology, right? And so the kind of system in which the capacity is embedded, we call it the enabling system. And the enabling system is a system that enables the development and construction and the maintenance of the focal trait of interest, the marker. In our case, for life, it is unlimited heredity. And in order to make this notion clear, we take a kind of little twist of William Paley's little thought experiment, which I'm sure you all know. So William Paley posed the big question of, he said, I'm crossing a heath, suppose I pitch my foot against a stone, and we're asked how the stone came to be there. And I will answer, well, maybe it was there forever. And that would not be an absurd question. But if I found a watch, then I would have to assume that there is a watchmaker. Therefore, there is God. Yes? That's the conclusion. Now, and Darwin gave some answer to this question. As we know, he said, no God, natural selection. But let's think about it a little bit differently. What does it mean to say really that you need a watchmaker? What is it that we really need when we find a watch on another planet? What do we say about it? Do we just say that there is a watchmaker? No. Yes, that too. But we say there are mines. People mine the metal. People do the glass. People have factories to produce something like glass. All kinds of little mechanical bits and pieces. It is a culture where time is important, and so on and so forth. In other words, what we are doing when we are finding a trait like this, we are building the enabling system of this. And the watchmaker is a part of this enabling system. It is, yes, we can also ask questions about the evolution of watches. How did watches evolve during cultural evolution? Very good question. But it's a slightly different question from the question that, as I'm posing it. So the first thing we do is describe the enabling system. Now imagine that we go to another planet and find big DNA molecules, nothing else, just DNA molecules. What can we say about them? We will have very good reasons to suggest that if this world is similar in its chemistry to the world in which we are living, these things were synthesized by something like a cell, because a big molecule of DNA cannot possibly just assemble spontaneously. This is impossible. So we can build the enabling system from the marker. Okay. So what we did, what we're doing in our work, and in our work is part of the big project Monsi and I, Simona, whose real name is Monsi, well, not that name, is Monsi, and we've been working on it for 12 years. So we've been thinking about it a lot. So what we said, well, we're not going to go about it in the way that Gandhi went about it, because he knew a hell of a lot more about life than we know about consciousness. What we shall do is we will follow some of his steps, but go in slightly different directions. Okay? So let's start with what people say about consciousness. What is consciousness? I mean, people give us lists, right? A lot of people give us lists. So let's look at a lot of the lists that people give us. What do they mean? They do specify it sometimes. Then we will suggest a transition marker for consciousness, and we suggest, and I'm telling you in advance, it suggests something that we will call, and we will tell you what we mean, something that is called unlimited associative learning, UAL. And I will explain what it means. Then we will characterize this capacity at the behavioral and functional level, and suggest a very, very simple toy model. And then we will show that the characteristic in the consciousness list that was not compiled by us, but by lots and lots of people, are also those that an animal with this capacity must satisfy. And once we do that, a lot of problems can be solved, such as the distribution problem, who has it, and so on and so forth, because unlike a consciousness, minimal consciousness, unlimited associative learning, although there are great gaps in our understanding of which animal can learn what, nevertheless it is a much more approachable problem than the problem of knowing whether an animal is conscious or not conscious. If it's a marker, but it's a marker. It's not to be identified with consciousness. It's a marker of consciousness. Of minimal consciousness. Okay. So what we did was we went to the literature and we started compiling. After all, we had 12 years. So we read and read and read, and in the end we compiled a list. Some of you may recognize, it's quite similar in many ways especially to the list that were compiled by Changer Dehaan and by Crick and Koch, although they were less specific, and Edelman, mainly Gerald Edelman. A lot of it is similar to what he said, but not exactly the same. And there were several overlapping. All this characteristics, capacities, whatever it is, are not very distinct. They're really overlapping, and there are arguments about what the boundaries are. But basically, we said there must be some flexible value system. There must be valuable flexible systems and goals, and people were talking about goal-directed behavior that is very, very characteristic of living organisms and so on and so forth. And you can assign a value or valence to a lot of different things, not just a few kind of responses of the animal, but to many, or percepts that the animal, or things that the animal perceives, but many things. It's unlimited. There must be unity and diversity, so something like sensory binding, so creatures can discern and discriminate between different percepts, even if these percepts have many similar features, but have different organization. There's global availability of information that involves multidirectional feedbacks and random interactions, so you can access this information. There is temporal thickness. There is some kind of sensory persistence. Every experience, subjective experience, has a kind of temporal depth. A lot has been written about it in the phenomenological literature. Selection, the selection processes of exploration and selective stabilization, but also a lot of processes of exclusion. In order to experience anything, a lot of things have to be excluded all the time. It's a point that was crucial to James' view of consciousness. For him, consciousness was a selecting agent. And a lot of people would give here only partial this, believing. But it's good, I think it's, and intentionality, there is some kind of about this, there must be some kind of something that we can call mapping or representation within the system in order to talk about it. And there must be embodiment, agency, the kind of thing that Björn Brems was talking about, coming some sense of self, even in the most basic, it must be there. All these people agree that this set of conditions are individually necessary and jointly more or less sufficient for consciousness. None of them is sufficient, right? None of them. But jointly, when you have a system where all these things come together, that comes as close as possible to something that we call consciousness. You can argue with me that, we can't be sure. Okay, but it's as close, if we define a system that has these properties and we agree that it has them, well, it seems like we're close to the real thing. Okay. So we suggested that unlimited associative learning is some kind of evolutionary marker. So when it appeared in evolution, in biological organisms, and we're talking about biological organisms, we're talking about consciousness as we know it. In the same way that we're talking about life as we know it, we talk about consciousness as we know it. We don't know of any consciousness that is not of biological organisms. Maybe one day we'll create robots which are conscious. Maybe we will not. I don't know. I'm not talking about these robots. Okay? I'm talking about biological organisms, and we know that some of them evolve consciousness. We did. Right? So it's a reality in the biological world. Right. So we suggest that among biological organisms, unlimited associative learning is a specific form of classical and operant associative learning. I'll come to Björn's distinctions soon because we're using them, in which the conditioned stimulus, the CS and the reinforced behavior, have the following features. It doesn't have to be only a conditioned stimulus, it can be also a pattern of actions, of course. It is compound, that is, it consists of several fused features, just call, for example, within a modality, color, shape, texture, and or action that are learned as a conjunction rather than separately. And spatial learning is and usually both self-learning and world learning come together, even though some of them can dominate. As Björn showed, world learning, when it usually has more effect than self-learning, when both of them occur at the same time and point to the same thing. Right? But usually both of them go together. This is novel, that is, it's neither reflex eliciting in the sense of reflex that is not something necessarily directed. It can be exploratory. But nevertheless, it will lead always to the same kind of, more or less, to the same kind of reaction. Nor is it pre-associated with the US or with reinforcement. That is, we didn't learn it before. And the learned CS, or the learned sequence of actions, can subsequently support second-order conditioning, acting as a US or reinforcement in itself. So we want a cumulative learning, in the same way that we want cumulative evolution when we're thinking about the living system and heredity. We want cumulative kind of learning to occur within the system. When a system satisfies this, we say, we think this is a marker. Now, why is it a marker? Why did we decide on this? It may seem to you like some kind of random decision that is based on intuition, and indeed it was to some extent, like everything else in this world, based on intuition and on some kind of analogy with Gandhi. But it's not just that. Yes?
Are you going to say why you would call it unlimited? So you're going to explain what limited associative learning is? Okay.
Yes. I will say a few things about it. I will not say a lot because I don't have time, but I do have slides downstream that refer to this question. So, for example, I'll give you just one example. The kind of behavior that Kandel had studied in aplesia, we call limited. Right? Now, with UAL, the number of associations that can be learned and recalled within and between modalities during the ontogeny of an individual far exceeds those that actually form during its lifetime. So this, like unlimited heredity, allowed open-ended evolution. Associative learning allows open-ended genetic adjustments. Okay. And for cumulative learning, it can lead to very complex behavior indeed. Now, why is it that we think that this is really a good mark? The reason that we think that is that if we try to think what kind of system can implement this, what kind of functional systems are needed for this type of learning to occur, we come to the conclusion that it is quite a demanding thing. It's not very, first of all, there must be mechanisms that integrate the various underlying features to form a compound. And the encoding must be multi-stage, hierarchical, and it has to be predictive. Otherwise, we don't think that there will be enough space in the brain and time in the world for it to happen. So it must be hierarchical. It must be based on top-down and bottom-up kind of interactions, going many times, reiterating interactions all the time. This is the kind, so it's a hierarchical system of this type, which is binding information and integrating it together. That's the first thing we have to demand from the system. There must be also a memory system that enables subsequent retrieval based on this learning patterns. It's not just a synaptic kind of memory, memory that we can sort of describe in the terms that Kindle described when he was talking about the Applesia system, although this system too is pretty complex when you're actually looking at the animal, right? It's very nice to do all kinds of little preparations, but in the actual animal, there is no central nervous system. There's nothing like that. Nevertheless, there must be dedicated memory systems, and yes, that are specific for compound patterns. This is what we expect. But something that Applesia doesn't seem to have. There must be some evaluation system that is able to assign value to any compound input, and that can give us a common currency that can compare things like smell and like pain and like something that is positive and something that is not positive in all modalities. We need some kind of current, and there must be a system that tells us this is the state of the body as a whole, and to this we assign priority now.
Any may be a little bit strong. Yes?
It is always,
you
yes.
The Garcia effect is not any.
You're right. It is not really any, but it's a lot.
But many. Okay.
Yeah, but many. There is nothing like any.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Now, okay, so this is what we want the system to be. Now, this is a simplified, this is a toy model. Okay, and here we're using Björn's distinctions between world learning and self-learning because we find these distinctions very good because, as he said, operant conditions and also most proponent conditions includes both self-learning and world learning. So we want to distinguish between them for heuristic purposes because otherwise the model, as you will see after we've dealt with it, is horrible. I mean, nobody can understand it. We hardly can understand it. Anyway, so this is world learning. So what we have here, there are functional units that are depicted, the functional neural units that are depicted as circles, receptors and effectors are squares, and the ellipse here is a circuit. It's not one synapse between one neuron and another. It's a circuit. The memo system is the memory system. Some kind of dedicated memory system. The AU is association unit, which is associated both motor responses, motor models, and perceptual models. So so the SIU here is an integrated unit, for example, for vision, but there will be many. Some will be extroceptive, some will be interoceptive, and some will be proprioceptive. So this is a toy model. Just showing, I'll just explain this and then you can. Right, so what we're seeing here, so now the blue thing is a kind of CS, if you want, right? So this is the CS. The red thing is the US, is the reinforcement. So there is, and there may be many more levels here. So we have a kind of, we get some signal here with the world. We did this arrow here because there is no signal in the world that is independent of action. For example, even when we see something, that's a cat. So we put it, that's why this arrow must always be there, although we don't learn about the saccades, but they are inherent in the system. Nothing, no saccade, no vision. Right, if we're thinking about vision in this case, but whatever we're thinking, it will be still more or less true. So we have the CS here, and we have a T to the US, and there is a kind of response unit, which is an integrating response unit, which is creating a model of prospective action, because this is a complex thing. It's not just having, inking in aplesia. It is making a complex response, dancing and then scratching your head, and then I don't know whatever, right? Now, so what we used here, okay. Now, in order for this to happen, a lot of things have to happen, and so there will be a connection between the perceptual unit, the CS, and the unit, the response unit, which is responsible for the reaction, the CR or the UR, whatever it is, and the US, which is red. Now, what we put here EC, which is the efferent copy, because always in a complex system, you must send an efferent copy that will compensate for whatever it is that you are doing, so that the animal knows that the results of your actions are your actions and not something imposed by the world, something that Björn thankfully has been talking about, something that people have been discussing, I think since Aristotle, in fact. By the way, and Mittelstadt, von Holst and Mittelstadt described in detail in the 1950s with their flies. There is a lot of blocking happening here, so exclusion of a lot of stimuli, sensory stimuli that are coming into the system that may be related to the reward, but are not causally related to the reward. And what we're seeing here is some kind, so there is something, so a connection is formed between the CS and the response system, and the actual reward is sent to the higher unit, to the integrating unit. The integrating unit evaluates the kind of signs that come from the response unit, which are based on past experience. And we want something that is additional to past experience. This is the prediction. We want basically to act according to new information that is additional to the information that we already have, right? So a signal about the past is sent also to the AU. This is the minus V, which takes into consideration the actual response multiplied by, or taking into consideration the associative strengths within the circuit, and what is sent back to the MIU, to the unit that controls the actual action, is PE, the prediction error. The actual reinforcement minus the expected reinforcement. And only then is the creature responding. Right. Now, I don't have much time. I'm sorry. At the whatever. So this is well learned. Very similar but simpler is self-learning. It is very, very similar. The same basic architecture, right? We're just looking here, and this happened one after the other. Now, CPG is central pattern generators. And we're just showing here the absolute bane bores of this. And so the architecture is the same, although the molecular biology, when you start with action, with learning about action, the molecular biology involved, the kind of receptors that are responding are not the same as in the same one. We're not assuming that for 1 second, but we're saying, look, it's basically the same architecture. In the usual case, this is what we get, a superposition of this thing. That's what I said. It is absolutely impossible to read this kind of thing. That's why we need to do all this preparatory work and to use concepts like those suggested by Brent that can only be implemented in a very artificial system, like hooking a Paul Drosophila to a rod. Right. Now, what I want to say about the enabling system of UAL is that what it does, it presupposes or implies that there is enhanced sensory discrimination and categorization. The system allows it. There is unity and diversity. There are flexible value systems because value can be assigned to any kind of, or not any, to many kinds of percepts. There is target selection and action selection through learning. This is more salient than this. Within the system, after you take into consideration also what you have learned in the past, right? Because this is part of what you send to the integrating unit, the association unit. And there is temporal thickness simply because there is this top-down, the bottom-up interaction going up and down, up and down. This kind of thing cannot happen if it just goes one direction. It has to go both directions, probably several times, and our model is highly simplified. So the temporal thickness is a function of the actual dynamic structure of this kind of system. We have to assume agency and embodiment for the system to work at all, because where are all these inputs coming from? And how is the rich, and how can we think about them? We have to think about intentionality, referral, we have to think about something that we can call neural representation, and in fact we think that we can give some substance to the notion of mental representations. We think that the necessary condition, we didn't start with it, but we think that the necessary condition is a central nervous system that enables integration of sensory and motor stimuli with multiple feedbacks and relations based on current stimulus and past memory. We think that all this is very, very important. Otherwise, we will not have this kind of complexity. Yes, plants can do great things. I just reviewed recently a wonderful paper about very simple associative learning in plants, but they have also, as far as we know, severe limitations. Okay, so this is what we have. And what I want to tell you, without going into detail because I do not have time, is that when we go through all the list of characteristics that we gave for consciousness that people compiled, all these characteristics are necessary for unlimited associative learning. Again, this doesn't imply that associative learning is consciousness. It is only an evolutionary marker of consciousness. Right? And it is not, in the same way that DNA is not alive, UAL is not consciousness. It is the animal that is conscious. Right? And it is the cell that is alive. Okay, so I will not go into details about that because I need to finish. Now, if we take UAL as an evolutionary marker, it can help us with some hard things. For example, how is consciousness distributed in the world? And we don't have many experiments that checked UAL with the rigorous criteria that we would like always, but we have a lot of proxies, and we can come to the conclusion that something like that appears in almost all vertebrates. We said probably all with a spelling mistake, because we don't think it's all, really, because we don't think that some very, very simple, very primitive fish do have it, but never mind, although most of them do. Many arthropods and the colloid mollusks. If UAL is a criterion, these animals, we can say about them, they are probably conscious. So it is a marker of consciousness. Its lack, however, is not something that we can say for sure. The system is not conscious, because if the enabling system, if you lost consciousness but your enabling system is still in place, you will be able to do quite a lot, even if part of the system isn't working, right? So a baby, so ontogeny does not recapitulate phylogeny in this case, because a baby comes to the world, it's not able to learn by UAL, but it does, it is a sentient being. Evolutionarily, however, we argue, you needed to evolve a UAL, and these creatures that evolved UAL, and it evolved, I think, independently in 3 groups, then were conscious animals. It's not a byproduct, by the way. It is the constitution of the system that gives us. It is a system like this, is a system which is conscious in the same way that it is not DNA that renders a system alive. it is a system with these properties, including this capacity, that is life. Okay. So I think this is a good point to, this is a very interesting thing, just showing us the incredible similarity between the vertebrate and the insect brains. I started in the ears. Not only are the bits having similar functional roles, but look at the connections are rather similar, which may suggest, maybe, I'm not sure about it, that they evolved from a common ancestor. For sure, the colloid cephalopods evolved 250 million years later, according to our criteria. So, and we can identify brain areas which are involved in this basic units that we described, the sensory integrating unit, the motor integrating unit, the one that models action, the AU, the associative integrating unit that takes the motor action and the sensory person together and does something with them, and the others, and look, and the memo, the dedicated memory systems, and do something and point to what they are in different animals. And when we're doing it, we see that there is a lot of overlap. Okay? That's one of the things that we do, and we think that this overlap is not a bug, but a feature. Okay, so that's it. I think there are lots of things, and we assume that consciousness first evolved. Consciousness is the one where you have the star, and the dark thing is something like a brain. And we think that it evolved in the middle late Cambrian, in the arthropods and the vertebrates, and in the colloid cephalopods 250 million years later. Right, so it can solve all kinds of nasty problems, and we have a lot to say about, and we think that both associative learning and especially unlimited associative learning not only appeared during the Cambrian, but it was one of the drivers of the Great Cambrian explosion. One, not the. Okay, thank you very much.